Alright, let's talk about a few more cards from the upcoming set, shall we? Captain Marvel. We know of all three of Captain Marvel's rarities. Her first one is a 5-cost shield character with a 1-4-3-2-5-6-3-6-7 stat line, and her ability says, when fielded, gain 1 life. For 5 energy, you're getting an above average stat line, but unfortunately this ability doesn't really do much. Yes, you gain a life when you field her, but look at her stat line, you're not KOing her very often, unless you're running her in some sort of a fabricate or auto KO team. And if that is your plan, then you're paying so much just to field her again over and over and over again that the cost is really outweighing the benefit. Now you can combine this with the common Adam Warlock effect where he doubles your when fielded effects and you're gaining 2 life. That makes it a lot more balanced, but you are paying 10 energy to do that because he cost 5 and she cost 5. I forgot to mention that she has the Avengers affiliation on all 3 of her cards, but there aren't too many Avengers affiliated teams floating around out there in the competitive constructed scene, and there aren't a ton of synergies within the Avengers affiliation itself, so you'd really be looking at some like basic actions that buff up your characters based on their affiliation. So because of her synergy with Adam Warlock and the above average stat line that you're getting for 5 energy, I could see picking her up in draft and it being pretty good. As for constructed, I'm not sure she does enough for warranting a spot on an 8-card team, so I don't think you'll see her very often unless you're running some sort of a theme tournament, that sort of thing. Looking at the uncommon Captain Marvel, she has the exact same stat line, same purchase cost, same Avengers affiliation. Her ability says when Captain Marvel is KO'd, gain 1 life. So I don't want to say this is wholly worse than the first one, but in a lot of cases it is. The only time that this is better than the common version is if you're up against Wonder Woman Reflections, because Wonder Woman Reflections ignores when fielded effects. Well, I shouldn't say that's the only time it's better. I'd say that this one's probably better with Fabricate because it triggers the moment you fabricate it and you can choose when that happens. When fielded effects, you have to pay that fielding cost for it to happen, and there are ways to work around having to pay that cost. Maybe you polymorph this into the field and then KO it using Fabricate. But when it comes down to it, this one struggles to get KO'd because it's got such a above average stat line on its 2 and its 3 sides. If you landed on its level 1, then you could KO it, but you'd struggle to get it KO'd on its 2 or 3 sides, I'd imagine. I don't see this getting much play in draft or in constructed, though it does seem like it would fit constructed a little bit better because there are guaranteed ways to KO something. Alright, now let's talk about the rare. The rare is a 6-cost shield character. It says, while Captain Marvel is active, whenever one of your sidekick dice is KO'd by an opposing character, an opponent's global ability, or an opponent's action die, return the sidekick to play at level 1. This card is so interesting to me because it's basically saying if you have chump blockers, you always have chump blockers. If you have this card and you have sidekicks out in the field, the only way your sidekicks are coming off the field is if you do something to them. If you attack with them and they go unblocked, if you fabricate them with something else and they get out of the field, if you KO them yourself, that's the only way they're coming off. Your opponent has no control over whether or not they can come off the field. This is a great general defensive piece, and it's also a good piece for flying sidekicks teams, which we haven't really seen a ton of at the competitive level, but I think they're trying to push a little bit because this card, along with a few other cards from this set, do a lot to buff up some flying sidekicks teams. And even though it's 6 cost, I think its ability is worth paying that price. Also worth noting that this does apply to allies as well, so all of your allies and sidekicks can't leave the field via your opponent. So I can see this being a constructed piece, and I could see this definitely being something that you pick up in a draft and try to get 6 energy for. Okay, next up we have some serious action die love in Cosmic Cube. The common Cosmic Cube is a 3-cost bolt action that says during your clear and draw step, when you draw this die from your bag, you may send it and any other dice you've drawn this turn out of play. For each die sent out of play, draw a die. This plays very similarly to Rip Hunter, and I think it matches up fairly well with Rip Hunter. I wouldn't put them together, but I'd say they do very similar things. And for the 3 cost, the 1 discount from the common Rip Hunter that is a 4 cost, you're getting some pretty good value. Now obviously this doesn't trigger every turn like Rip Hunter does, but the dice also don't go back into the used pile, which means you can really dig for things that you didn't get that first go around. Bag cycles don't trigger with this like they do with Rip Hunter. All in all, it's pretty cool. This is a straight up auto draft within the draft format, and I think this does see play in constructed, and I think this helps push forward the action die archetype of where you just run a bunch of action dice. The only issue with that as of right now is not being able to get blockers out and block things, but this is definitely one of those pieces of the puzzle puzzle that puts that on the map as being possible. And if that card wasn't interesting enough, let's take a look at its uncommon version. Its uncommon version is a 2-cost bolt action that says your first action die purchased this turn costs 1 less to a minimum of 1. Each other different action die you purchase this turn costs 3 less to a minimum of 1. This discount applies to both basic actions and actions on your team, and so both can be purchased at these discounts. The first thing I thought of when I read this card was how much value can I get out of it with that 3 discount, and so things that popped into my head were running 1 against many, that basic action card that deals target player X damage where X is the number of character dice in their field zone plus 2. I thought of Long Live the Resistance, which is a 5-cost as well and gains you 4 life. And the very first thing that popped in my head was Delayed Blast Fireball, which is yet another 5-cost action that deals 4 damage to your opponent's board after their main step. These are all expensive actions that now cost 2 because of this 2-cost Cosmic Cube, and all you have to do is purchase something before it with a discount. This is a hugely valuable card and I think makes teams exist that didn't exist beforehand. With this card, you could put together a control team that cycles Delayed Blast Fireballs through your bag, constantly KOing your opponent's entire board. Things like that are possible because of this card's discount. This does have a few targets in draft that you want to fetch with it, and the discount does help on things like Rare Nowhere that you could get in draft. But overall, I see this having huge value in Constructed. Here we have all 3 variants of Cosmo the Space Dog. All of his variants are 2-cost shield characters with the Guardian affiliation, an 012, 013, 133 stat line. The common version says when fielded, you may KO Cosmo Space Dog, and if you do, prevent all damage dealt to your other Guardian's character dice this turn. This to me is cool in the sense that you can set up for a large push with all of your Guardian's characters, knowing that your opponent needs to block in order to stay alive, and then avoid any of your Guardian's characters actually getting KO'd because Cosmo the Space Dog prevents all the damage dealt to them. This has great synergy in draft where you're obviously going to be seeing Guardian's characters. In Constructed, I don't think it makes an 8-card team even on a Guardian's team because there are so many other things that you want to fit onto that team and cards that you want to include for protection and for ramp and that sort of thing. So it probably doesn't make the cut in Constructed, but I think it does warrant some consideration within the draft format. The uncommon Cosmo the Space Dog says, while Cosmo Space Dog is active, your other Guardian's character dice get +1 defense. Within the Constructed realm, I think this is most beneficial when you're running Rocket Raccoon, as most of his versions have a 1 defense on like a lot of his sides. Outside of that, providing a 1 defense static buff doesn't really do much with regards to the stat lines that you see on Guardian's characters because none of those are really understated on the defensive side except Rocket Raccoon. Again, this has more value in draft than it does in Constructed because it just does not make the cut on an 8-card team. The rare version of Cosmo says if Cosmo Space Dog is KO'd while blocking, unblocked attacking character dice deal no more than 2 damage this turn. So here we have an effect similar to the Mira Global that we saw in War of Light, which saw a lot of play. And while in most games packaging a good ability with a character with a body is a good thing, in this instance not so much because the trigger for using that ability is him getting KO'd while blocking, which means if he gets off the field and you don't roll him next turn, then you can't take advantage of his ability. Now I admit that I could be wrong on this card, but I don't love it. I'm not a big fan of it. It works and it can work, but I don't see it making a spot on an 8-card team as of right now. But I will say this is one card that I feel the least confident on because I think it does have a huge upside if it does turn out that it's good. Alright, now let's talk about a card that I skipped. Here is the super rare Captain America from this set. This is a 4-cost shield character that says, while Captain America is active, your sidekick dice gain +1 defense and infiltrate. By itself, with no other synergies involved, this card is insane if you are ahead on the board. This gives you the freedom to build up a sidekick wall and attack with it, knowing that they're going to come right back because they're just going to deal their 1 damage and then come back via infiltrate. This also breaks the stalemate of 2 sidekick walls. So if your opponent and you both have a bunch of sidekicks and you attack, yours are staying and theirs are getting KO'd. And obviously this also applies to allies. All of your allies will gain the infiltrate keyword. And then if you combine these cards that we've already talked about with sidekick buffing cards, then you have some serious things to deal with as an opponent against a flying sidekick team. Yeah, this card is really, really good. It makes flying sidekick teams really strong. It's good in both draft and constructed, and it's one you want to look out for. So there you have it. There's another batch of cards. Let me know what you think about these cards. Which of these cards that we've talked about do you think will make the most impact in the competitive meta? Which do you think is the best pickup in draft? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.